The airport was alive with the energy of early morning travelers. Business people lugged briefcases, families wrangled excited children, and weary tourists shuffled along with cups of overpriced coffee in hand. Among the crowd, a man stood out, not because of anything unusual about his demeanor, but because of the red cap perched on his head. The bold white letters on the front read MAGA. He was a middle-aged man, perhaps in his early 50s, with graying temples and a neatly tailored navy blue suit. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a boarding pass in the other, his expression calm and unbothered as he approached Gate C-23 at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. A young stewardess glanced his way, her expression hardening. She adjusted her uniform and took a deliberate step forward, blocking his path to the boarding queue. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her tone clipped. "We have a neutrality policy here. I'm going to have to ask you to remove your hat before boarding." The man tilted his head slightly, meeting her eyes without a hint of hostility. "I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of such a policy," he replied politely. "This hat represents my personal beliefs. I'm not causing any trouble." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Regardless, we can't allow passengers to wear items that could be considered divisive or political. Either you remove it, or we'll have to deny you boarding." A few people in the nearby line turned their heads. Whispers began to ripple through the small crowd. Some passengers exchanged uneasy glances, while others averted their eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing confrontation. The man remained calm. "I understand your concern, but I'm not looking to make a statement. I'm simply here to catch my flight." His voice was steady, measured, as if he had encountered similar situations before. But the stewardess was unrelenting. "Sir, I'm giving you one last chance. Remove the hat or step aside." At this, the man paused. He didn't argue or raise his voice. Instead, he slowly stepped out of the line, his movements deliberate. The whispers grew louder, and passengers leaned in to watch as the stewardess, her posture rigid, called for security. Two uniformed officers arrived moments later, their expressions unreadable. After a brief conversation, they escorted the man away from the gate. He walked without protest, carrying his briefcase and wearing the same small smile he had when he first approached the gate. The stewardess exhaled sharply, brushing a strand of hair from her face. One of the passengers in line, a younger woman with a baby strapped to her chest, murmured to her companion, "That seemed unnecessary." Another man further back muttered under his breath, "Good riddance." The tension lingered in the air, a quiet but palpable divide among the waiting passengers. As the gate settled back into its usual rhythm, no one noticed the small group of airline employees whispering in the corner, their faces pale as they glanced repeatedly at their phones. "Did you see the email?" one of them asked. The other nodded, their voice trembling as they replied, "We need to tell her. Now." The stewardess, her confidence still firm from the confrontation, began organizing the boarding process. Group numbers were called, and passengers shuffled forward. Though her exterior remained professional, she couldn't ignore the uneasy buzz among her colleagues. The whispers grew louder as they huddled near the gate desk, shooting her quick, nervous glances. "What's going on?" she finally asked, her tone sharp, addressing one of her coworkers. "If there's an issue, just tell me." A young gate agent hesitated, clutching his tablet like a shield. I think you need to see this," he stammered, his face pale. He tilted the screen toward her. On it was an email marked urgent, sent directly from the airline's headquarters. Her eyes skimmed the message quickly, her brows furrowing with each line. Then her face froze. The words seemed to echo in her mind, louder with every repetition. Asterisk new CEO introduction. Frequent traveler. Special guest on Flight 328. red hat as signature attire. Asterisk. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt an unfamiliar pang of dread. This has to be a mistake, she muttered, shaking her head as if to dispel the reality creeping into her mind. But a sinking feeling told her it wasn't. Across the terminal, the escorted man was now seated in one of the less crowded waiting areas. He glanced out at the runway, seemingly unbothered. His briefcase sat neatly at his feet, and the red hat remained firmly in place. His calm demeanor, even after being removed from his flight, was beginning to draw curious looks from other travelers. The stewardess turned to the gate agent, her voice lowered but urgent. "Where's he now? Did they escort him off the premises?" The agent shook his head. "No, he's still here. They just moved him out of the immediate boarding area." "Okay," she said quickly, trying to keep her composure. "I'll talk to him. We can fix this before anyone else notices." But the damage was already done. Passengers in the area had overheard snippets of the situation, and smartphones were out, recording and snapping photos. Social media posts began trickling online. Asterisk man with MAGA hat kicked off flight. What happened next will shock you. Asterisk another read. Asterisk airline staff confronts MAGA supporter. Drama at the gate. Asterisk. By the time she approached him, the man had already noticed her coming. He stood as she arrived, meeting her gaze with the same measured calm that had unnerved her before. "Sir, I'd like to personally apologize," she began, forcing a smile. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding about our policy. I'd be happy to assist you back onto the flight." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "No misunderstanding," he replied evenly. "You made yourself very clear." His words hung in the air, their weight far heavier than their simplicity suggested. The stewardess felt a heat rising in her cheeks, an uncomfortable mix of embarrassment and guilt. "Please," she insisted, "we'd like to make this right." The man's small smile returned, and it wasn't smug or vengeful. It was polite, even kind. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet confidence that made her squirm. "Thank you," he said, his tone as steady as ever. "But I'll wait. I'm sure we'll have a chance to speak again under different circumstances." She nodded mutely, unsure of what else to say. As she turned and walked back to the gate, she couldn't help but notice that the whispers among her colleagues had grown louder. Whatever chance she thought she had to contain the situation was slipping away faster than she could grasp. Back at the gate, the stewardess returned to her post, her mind racing. The email replayed in her thoughts like a drumbeat, and every passing second felt heavier than the last. The passengers continued to board the plane, but she couldn't shake the gnawing sense that her career might have just taken a nosedive. Then it happened. The gate agent's phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the airport's background noise. He hesitated for a moment before answering, his face already pale, turned ghostly as the voice on the other end spoke rapidly. "Yes, ma'am," he stammered, glancing toward the stewardess. "She's right here. I'll put her on." He extended the phone toward her like it was a live grenade. "It's corporate," he said softly, his eyes darting to the passengers nearby. "They're not happy." The stewardess snatched the phone, pressing it to her ear. "This is Lisa," she said, her voice a touch too formal, trying to steady her nerves. The voice on the other end was firm, direct, and not in the mood for excuses. "Lisa, this is Amanda Reynolds, Senior VP of Operations. We have a serious problem. Were you aware that the passenger you removed from the gate is Mr. Carter Mason, the incoming CEO of our airline?" Lisa's stomach dropped. The weight of the moment hit her all at once, and her grip on the phone tightened. I wasn't informed of his identity," she stammered. I was just enforcing the policy. That policy doesn't apply here. Amanda cut her off. Not only is Mr. Mason our new CEO, but he's also one of our most valued frequent flyers. And now, thanks to your actions, this incident is already making waves on social media. Damage control is underway, but this is going to reflect poorly on everyone involved, especially you. Lisa's cheeks burned. She tried to form a response, but the words caught in her throat. Amanda continued, her tone icy. I expect you to personally apologize to Mr. Mason and do everything in your power to ensure he feels respected and accommodated. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Lisa managed to whisper. The call ended abruptly, leaving her standing there with the phone still pressed to her ear. When she finally lowered it, she realized the gate agent and a few nearby coworkers were staring at her, their expressions a mix of pity and discomfort. Without another word, she straightened her uniform and marched toward the waiting area where Mr. Mason sat. The buzz of nearby conversation seemed to quiet as she approached, the weight of countless eyes on her every move. He looked up as she arrived, his expression still calm, though there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. Mr. Mason, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I'd like to extend my sincerest apologies for what happened earlier. I was unaware of your position within the company, and I deeply regret my actions. He regarded her for a long moment, then gestured to the seat across from him. Have a seat, he said, his tone polite but firm. Lisa hesitated but complied, perching nervously on the edge of the chair. It wasn't personal, she added quickly. I was following what I thought was company policy. And do you enforce this policy equally? He asked, his voice measured. Would you have reacted the same way if it were a different hat? A different message? Her silence spoke volumes. She opened her mouth to respond but found no words that felt honest. Mr. Mason's smile returned, but it was tinged with sadness this time. Bias can be subtle, he said quietly, but it's always there shaping how we treat people. It's something we all need to recognize and correct. Lisa swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Before she could gather her thoughts, Mr. Mason stood and extended a hand to her. I appreciate your apology, he said, but I think this situation needs to be addressed on a larger scale. I'll be speaking with corporate about how we move forward. He shook her hand briefly and turned to leave. Lisa watched him go, a knot of dread tightening in her chest. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. As Mr. Mason walked away, Lisa remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She glanced around the terminal, aware of the furtive glances and whispered conversations among passengers and staff. The weight of the moment pressed on her, and the realization of what she had done began to sink in fully. Back at the gate, the buzz of activity was subdued. The other employees avoided eye contact with Lisa, though their unease was palpable. The flight boarded without further incident, and soon the plane taxied down the runway. But Lisa's mind wasn't on the departing aircraft. It was on the fallout that was surely headed her way. Meanwhile, Mr. Mason returned to the lounge area, his calm demeanor unshaken. He opened his briefcase, retrieved a notebook, and began jotting down thoughts. He had no intention of letting the incident slide, but he also wasn't out for revenge. Instead, he saw an opportunity to address a deeper issue within the company. By the time the plane was in the air, the incident was already trending online. Videos and photos captured by onlookers had gone viral, sparking debates on social media. Some users praised Lisa for enforcing what they believed was a neutral policy, while others condemned her actions as discriminatory and unprofessional. The airline's official Twitter account began receiving an avalanche of mentions, demanding explanations and accountability. Inside corporate headquarters, A crisis team convened to draft a response. Amanda Reynolds, the VP who had spoken to Lisa, paced the room as she reviewed the reports coming in. "This is a disaster," she muttered, scrolling through her phone. "We need to get ahead of this before it spirals any further." Mr. Mason's phone buzzed with messages from the executive team, but he ignored them for the moment. He knew they were scrambling to contain the PR nightmare, but his focus was on crafting a broader solution. As the new CEO, he felt a responsibility not just to the company's image, but to its culture. The next morning, a formal apology was issued by the airline, acknowledging the mishandling of the situation and emphasizing their commitment to treating all passengers with respect. The statement included a promise to implement mandatory sensitivity and bias training for all staff. For Lisa, the aftermath was more personal. She was called into a meeting with her supervisor and HR, where the gravity of her actions was laid bare. Though she wasn't fired, she was placed on probation and required to attend additional training sessions. The experience left her shaken, but it also forced her to confront her own biases and the assumptions she had made in the heat of the moment. In the weeks that followed, the airline's leadership team worked closely with Mr. Mason to roll out the new training programs. Employees were encouraged to share their experiences and perspectives, creating an open dialogue about bias and professionalism. The initiative was met with mixed reactions. Some applauded the effort, while others viewed it as performative. But for Mr. Mason, it was a step in the right direction. A month later, the ripple effects of the incident were still being felt across the airline industry. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked bias and the importance of fairness in customer service. For Mr. Mason, the event had become a defining moment early in his tenure as CEO. At the next company-wide meeting, held in a sprawling conference hall in Phoenix, Mr. Mason addressed the airline's employees directly. The room was filled with a mix of executives, flight attendants, gate agents, and ground crew. A live stream allowed employees across the country to tune in. Standing at the podium, he adjusted the microphone and began speaking with the same calm, measured tone he had shown that day at the gate. "Every one of us carries biases, whether we recognize them or not," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "These biases shape our decisions, our interactions, and our perceptions of others. But in a company like ours, one that serves millions of people from every walk of life, we cannot let personal judgments dictate how we treat others." He paused, scanning the faces in the audience. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked down, reflecting on his words. "I want to be clear," he continued. "This isn't about assigning blame or shaming anyone for their mistakes. It's about learning from those mistakes and growing as individuals and as a team." The incident at Gate C-23 was unfortunate, but it gave us an opportunity to examine our policies, our training, and our culture. And I'm proud to say we've taken meaningful steps to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. The room was silent, every eye on him. I've often said that leadership isn't about making people fear you. It's about inspiring them to be better. That day, I could have let my anger take over. I could have demanded immediate action against the employee involved. But what would that have accomplished? Instead, I chose to engage, to listen, and to find a solution that helps all of us move forward. A smattering of applause began to build, growing louder as more employees joined in. Mr. Mason smiled, not in triumph, but in gratitude. The meeting concluded with the unveiling of the airline's new initiative, a program called Flight Path Forward, designed to promote inclusivity, respect, and professional development at every level of the company. It included workshops, mentorship opportunities, and a revamped approach to handling passenger interactions. As for Lisa, the stewardess who had initially confronted Mr. Mason, she had taken the lessons to heart. The experience had humbled her, and she became an active participant in the new training program. Over time, she grew to become an advocate for fairness and respect within her team, using her story as an example of how personal growth can stem from even the most uncomfortable situations. For the passengers who had witnessed the incident, the viral videos and the headlines that followed the story served as a reminder of a universal truth. The way we treat others, especially in moments of conflict, reveals more about us than it does about them. And for Mr. Mason, the red hat remained a quiet symbol, not of division, but of resilience. It reminded him that leadership requires more than authority. It demands empathy, humility, and the courage to lead by example. Moral of the story: judgments made in haste, without understanding or empathy, often lead to regret. True leadership lies not in asserting power, but in inspiring positive change, even in the face of conflict. Respecting others, regardless of differences, creates the foundation for growth and unity.